Hello and welcome back to the second part of this Module 6 presentation. And here what I'm going to do is very quickly go through kind of the main points in lieu of our exam coming up next week. We're going to talk about that. But for this week, I just want to go through the main ideas. Okay, the relief theory is born out of this notion of contradictions, something we visited last week with incongruity theory, which is why they kind of flow the way they do in the book and in the slides. And in this particular case, the degree of laughter, right, the amount of laughter that we engage in a joke involves the releasing of this pent-up energy. Now, the pent-up energy is coming from us entertaining an incongruous idea that is sort of at odds with an anticipation or expectation that we have of something that should occur following the laws of logic or reason or the laws of nature or whatever. But again, it's the same thing of us holding these two ideas in our thoughts, in our head that is, but the thoughts are between what is occurring in front of us or we're reading and we're seeing or hearing and what should be. And so that disconnect builds up an expectation of how will this be resolved. And of course, it gets resolved in a mild way. So it causes laughter, not tears or horrifying thoughts, because again, it needs to be on the realm of laughable, right? Possible, laughable, certainly, but not to the degree that it's going to cause us some kind of harm. So it's the releasing of pent-up energy. So humor, for example, in the 17th century, right, the 1600s, was something that humor and laughter was about releasing this pent-up energy that was natural or otherwise natural and free. So there was already, even at this point, excuse me, there was already at this point the notion that there were parts of us that were natural and free or perhaps even childlike that gets repressed as we enter from a state of nature as little kids to a state of culture, which is us as adults. And culture is all the rules and regulations that we have to follow. And depending on how well we navigate that transition from a state of nature to culture, indicates how healthy our minds are to entertain these thoughts that we may have had in a more natural state. Now, in other words, natural, free of inhibitions, free and, from those things that would stop us from saying and acting the kinds of things that would be, make us look like we're just maybe a little bit crazy. So as little kids, it's kind of hard to look and act crazy. You just are, you're just being a kid doing goofy things. But as we get older, there is an expectation, right? There's an anticipation of us behaving. Getting a cup of tea here, my throat's a little bit dry. Anyway, so what relief theory is about is releasing that pent-up energy, which used to be considered naturally free spirits. And the degree to which we have to repress them tells us the degree to which we're living in a particular culture or society that, refrains and frowns upon us acting in childish ways. It also liberates energies that are expended by rationality. We like to think sometimes of things being absurd or illogical or irrational. Well, culture is about rationality. Culture is about expectations and norms and traditions. So all these things go into this idea of the relief, that temporary relief that we have of, unburdening ourselves of this whole edifice of authority and logic and reason. We get to play with goofy things. We get to think about goofy things and sometimes taboo things too. So we have sort of three main people we look at, Spencer, Freud, and Bakhtin. We're going to get through those. Spencer associates laughter with the release of pent-up nervous energy, built-up tension created by the anticipation of what we think might happen or will happen next. So there's a kind of narrative expectation that is now sort of thwarted or usurped or deviated by the punchline. And that nervous energy that's created around the narrative is suddenly discarded in the form of laughter. So the theories of Freud and, of course, later Spencer are kind of mechanical and hydraulic, which are kind of antiquated views of the world. We don't use those anymore, but we can certainly understand what they're after, right? It is still just a model, right? A kind of fiction that we can at least understand the premise behind it, which is the releasing of energy. That's all relief theory is. So just consider it metaphorically. Now, Freud picks up on Spencer's ideas, his ideas of theory and laughter, and reworks them into laughter releasing what he called psychic energy. Still use the same sort of mechanical model, but the notion of a release of energy is still the same. Rather than nervous energy, Sigmund Freud believes that it's psychic energy. And that's the energy that kind of runs through the id, the ego, the superego, all those different parts of the brain, the conscious, the unconscious, all of that terrain, right? All that real estate is all controlled by psychic energy. And so we are able, if we're mentally healthy, we're able to laugh at jokes that address taboo subjects because we were able to otherwise repress those feelings. If we cannot repress those feelings, then we don't even recognize them as jokes, right? This is just something that people do. People, of course, punch each other in the head and randomly, act out violent forms of behavior. No, of course not. A rational person would not do that. So if we can recognize something as just temporarily funny, we are mentally healthy, according to Freud. So when we are talking about taboo jokes, we still need to create that audience that will validate what we're doing as a joke and not as something else. So the joke teller needs that audience, right? Because the latter will validate the joke telling and identify it as a joke and not something else, a call to action or something, or some kind of mantra or motto that you live by. So the comedian needs the audience to validate the fact that he is telling them jokes and not anything else. Now, there are also problems with Freud's theories, like there is with Spencer. One is that hydraulic model. There's also, and this is quite important, the difference between an innocent joke and a rude joke is still one of interpretation. That one does not fall under the mechanical hydraulic model. It is open to interpretation. There are people that can handle, rude humor and objectionable humor or, controversial jokes more easily than others. A lot of it has to do with who we are, our upbringing, our experiences, personal or otherwise, that we may not find, say, jokes about cancer to be funny because, we suffer from it or our parents have died from it. It's not something you laugh at. And you have every right to believe that because it is open to interpretation. And also, too, is the fact that taboo jokes are not necessarily funnier than regular jokes. Jokes told by a kid or a joke told on a Disney, Channel after school special or something doesn't make it any less or more funny. They're just taboo jokes. So they have to be good. And finally, we talked about Bakhtin and how Bakhtin took this idea of the expending of psychic energy, allowing that energy to be siphoned off or at least deferred into something else, into the form of laughter rather than into the form of, buying a gun. Bakhtin thought that we could laugh at authority figures in the same ways we would laugh at sort of our, the superego in our mind saying, you shouldn't be saying these things or thinking these things, but you're saying to yourself, yeah, but it's just a joke, right? It's just, I was only kidding. I was only kidding. That's what that means. So with Bakhtin, humor might help us to live with authority figures by working as a kind of social safety valve. We know the position we are in society. We are the underlings, the minions, the students, the working class or whatever. And other people are, lucky enough to be born millionaires or to be millionaires. And we reserve the right to make fun of them because secretly we kind of hate them. We wish we could be like them. So the way in which we can siphon off that jealousy and hatred, right, which is a real mingling of not very good, emotional states, we can siphon that off by making jokes about them. And so we can do that. And Bakhtin, in the same way as Freud, both of them think that this is still healthy. This is a good thing. So we are making jokes about the status quo, about authority figures, about those in power, but those people don't lose their power. They get to carry on. So that's why the notion of carnival is somehow revolutionary. It isn't. It's literally part of the social fabric, or at least it was in Western Europe at the time Bakhtin was studying it, although he did write during the 20th century. But right now, we have codes and conventions that we follow because we want to, because they are good to follow, because it gives our life order and meaning. So during that carnival period, though, those codes and conventions and laws are temporarily suspended. and it becomes a free-for-all. And we can, slap a priest in the face, let's say in the 1500s, because they would otherwise be horrible people, making us do all kinds of things. And guess what? The priest would have to take it. So you go, okay, boom, and you a little slap in the head, or it could be a kick in the arse or something, but that's it. You don't beat them to death. You don't club them and string them up or set fire to them. No, you don't do that. But you do something that is joyful. Mild forms of violence are accepted, but you can't go too far. And everyone knew that. So Carnival did turn those traditional social hierarchies of, those in power at the top, us at the bottom, turned it upside down. The end result is the world is upside down temporarily. And that's not a bad thing. That's in fact a healthy thing. So carnivalized texts, texts that present an alternative viewpoint, a different way to live, makes fun of authority, those still need to be considered within the confines that, this is just literature. These are just jokes. These are not a call to arms. This is not a call to, revolt. That's something else entirely. So the idea of carnival is actually socially healthy, in the same way that Freud looks at taboo jokes as psychically and mentally healthy. If we can vicariously consider in our conscious mind, or vicariously experience in society, that form of behavior that is otherwise considered, irrational, illogical, rude, criminal maybe, that's not a bad thing, because it ends, we go back to our regular lives, and the world continues. Authority figures continue to exist, and our lives carry on. So that's essentially it. That's the whole thing. So we'll talk a little bit about the exam next week. There isn't going to be really a presentation, but we're going to meet definitely next Monday, not this one, the 15th, but the following, the 22nd, I believe, would be the next one, but do check. So we will not meet on Monday. In lieu, I've given you this little short overview, but we are going to get together the following week and talk about the exam. I don't know if I'm going to put a video together, but I would rather just answer your questions and just sort of basically what I've done at the beginning of each of the classes, in the modules, the slides particularly. That's the information I want you to look at, because that's where I managed to get the information that I used to write the test. So don't worry about the test for this week, not till next week. Take care, and I will see you all a week from now. So take care then. Bye-bye.